He's not thrilled to be here. You can go, Chip. You can go, Chippies. Alright. Freshly charged battery, refreshed card, nothing on it but what we recorded so far. So I'm going to start with what got cut off at the end of last week's video by my card filling up. And that's the dinosaurs and other little pastel animals. I don't know what to do. I mean, I know you want to buy them, and I'm very happy that people have that enthusiasm. I have no idea what to charge for them. And of course, the easiest way to figure that out is to put them on eBay and let you decide. But I'm not sure if you want to do eBay. I know not everybody likes eBay. But like I said, you can probably tell I have no idea how to get these dinosaurs in a transaction off to you. So if you have suggestions, everybody converge in the comments with them. And what have I been doing doll-wise since last week? Odds and ends, some of which I have posted on Instagram and Flickr, some of which I haven't. Like this dude has gotten a lot of love. Of course, this is Hip Hoodie Fashionista Dude's head. The body is a Soldier Story action figure body that Flo sent, thanks again. Although Flo sent it without feet or hands. So I actually, the feet and hands on this are from the female Soldier Story bodies that I got from Josh a year or so ago. Thanks. And so I had to rig up wrist from the Hobby Base ball-shaped joints, and the ankle connectors are the same basic design, but the nubs on the foot ankles were a little bit too big to fit into the body, so I used the Dremel, a spherical bit on the Dremel to open that up. So he has some articulation on his feet, and he can stand. I don't know if he's in frame, but he can stand. Cat hair. But the big thing was the Soldier Story body, like a lot of modern action figure bodies, was just kind of a dead zombie gray skin tone. So I just went through my husband's ready mixed airbrush paint. He tends to do war game tabletop figures, like military stuff, or you know, like dungeon people, and it's a lot of neutral colors. And I did find this brown, which is fairly close to Hip Hoodie's skin tone, so just real fast I airbrushed the body. Like, I didn't even do the thing, you know, technically you're supposed to bend the joints and airbrush into the little nooks and crannies. I didn't really do that. So, I mean, I concentrated the paint around the top of the body, and it's not nearly as solid down here, so we'll just pretend that, you know, he always wears pants and these not cotton tan. It didn't match the head perfectly, so I actually held the airbrush low, like sprayed up to try to blend the skin tone from the bottom of the head into the neck, and there's some overspray onto his hair, but it just looks like highlights. I mean, I technically should go over his face paint to brighten it up because it got neutralized a little bit by the paint, but I don't think he looks that bad. He does need pants. These are Barbie brand Ken boxer shorts. I had a pair of me-made boy doll jeans that's ready to put on him, and they didn't fit. I thought it was just because, you know, he has these buff action figure physique. I thought maybe he just didn't fit Ken pants. I eventually realized that the pants were actually for a Live Jake body, so they probably wouldn't even fit a regular Ken. Actually, I figured out when I tried to put them on another Ken, and they still wouldn't fit over his thighs. Like, okay. So I need to make pants for him eventually. I don't think he minds hanging out like this, though. So that was a project I didn't expect to do. I was actually looking through my box of dolls for something else, and it clicked that he had the right kind of neck connector to work. And you see it's not on terribly well, it's just on good enough. But he had the right kind of neck connector to work with this body, even though the body didn't work with him. I made it. So that was one thing, and he's turned out to be pretty popular. I still haven't given him a proper name. He's just Hip H in my files because Hip Hoodie. And another thing I did that I've shared photos of is a month or so ago I thrifted this dress for 99 cents it was cute, but not really well made. It was pure polyester, which there's nothing wrong with polyester. I just, if I don't breathe, I get uncomfortable. Not me breathing, you know, skin, breathable cloth. Boy, am I babbling this week. And also it was mostly white, which I don't wear white because I tend to be very messy. I mean, I think I got all the chocolate milk off my face before this, but I'm sorry if I didn't. And so that was, made me not likely to wear it. And also once I got it home, I noticed that the print on it was actually one way and it was upside down in the back. But the reason I got it is because there was this applique on the neck. And it wasn't really very well made. It was beaded and embroidered, but the base cloth was maybe a little thin, so it wasn't really laying flat. But still, I thought there was potential with this applique. Like if I were going to use it on another piece of human clothes, then I could like put a backing on it to give it more strength. But I started playing around with it and thought, well, you know, this is nice and lightweight. It could work for dolls. And I held it up to a 60-centimeter doll, and it was huge. And for fun, I held it up to a 6th scale doll, and it actually could drape around enough to make a whole dress. So that's this. What I did is, well, first, I mean, I draped it around. You see the back. I hand sewed it. I mean, there's not a lot here. I didn't feel like it was my usual dislike of a hand sewing didn't really apply to this because there wasn't much of it, and there was no way that I was gonna manhandle this very, very textured thing through my sewing machine. Something would break. So I sewed in this zipper. It's invisible zipper, although I didn't sew it in properly, so it's visible. And like I sewed it into about there, and then I whipped it together so it wouldn't unzip beyond it, and so you get a bit of a kick pleat, maybe. Pleat, not a kick. I'm just thinking more than I'm talking, and I'm still trying to talk while I'm thinking, so I apologize for being more garbled than usual. So I did that, and then I whip stitched, not really whip stitched, back stitched up the sides. And I mean, there were a few areas where I had to hem things, like the neckline and on the base here. But anyway, so that's this, which I thought was completely ridiculous. So Maddie Maud is a nice ridiculous doll. Thanks again to Deb for her. So she's in that. And it is very sparkly. It's just, the sun has gone behind the clouds since I've started recording this, so I don't know if you can see how sparkly it is, but it is sparkles. So I had pictures of her up, and then the other doll I have shared pictures of is this, which is a little pull-up head that Emmy Moon gave me years ago on one of the Dynamite Girls bodies that Flo sent last month, or the month. Things are just running together. I know Flo sent it over the summer. Like many of the bodies Flo sent, it didn't have hands, which is making me have to be creative. I originally had a different head on this body, and I I drilled out her forearms to take a really big Obitsu male neck connector that I had cut apart and put these action figure gloved hands on. But I decided that that head that I had on the body, I could not live with her stock hair. It needed a reroute, so that just got put away for some unforeseen future. And then I realized that this body was a good skin tone to match this little pull-up head. But I did not want her to have the big, clunky action figure gloves. So my main thing about why I'm not rigging up a lot of hands into bodies is the hobby base joints like I used on this. You see how these are pretty huge. I've used up most of the smaller joints. So I know I could have rigged up actual hands on wrist joints if I had more of those, but I was lazy. So I just went through my box of hands, and there was a pair of Shawnee, I think Shawnee style Barbie hands that I'd cut up the arms off at about there. So what I did was I just whittled them down until they were the right size to fit in this body. I did overzealously whittled them down a little bit too much, so I had to put the Teflon tape back on to bulk them up. I like whittled down this one even more, so there's more Teflon tape. Or PFTE tape, if you want to be non-brand name. And so the hands, of course the wrist can't do this, but they can spin, and it's good enough for photos. I whittled them down with the Dremel, so it's pretty gougy and irregular, but I remember John saying several times that if you're sanding vinyl and it gets a little rough looking, that if you go over it with acetone, that will smooth out the edges. So actually, it's not super smooth, but I did use John's tip with acetone on that to smooth her arms out. And this wig is from a Madame Alexander doll that I got in a trade years ago. So I had this head on a Momoko body, which is, you know, a little more delicate, a little more petite than anything from Integrity Toys. And I think the size is really good on Momoko body. Of course it would work pretty well, I think, on an actual pull-up body, but I don't think she's too bad on here. It's still 2, 3, 4, 5. See, it's still technically way bigger than it should be, since a real body is supposed to be 7 heads tall. And Fashion Illustration, which is what most of the Integrity Toys Fashion Royalty do, is 9 heads tall. So it's still technically, it's not too small a head. It's just we're used to pull-up heads being huge compared to the bodies that we're on. But I think it works. I think I will leave her on this body. I think this is her forever body, at least until I come up with something better. But I think it's pretty good. So those are the things I've photographed, and then there's just the stuff I'm playing with, odds and ends, some of which I'm still working through, which I will go, we went away from dolls for a moment. Queen of Squids has an airbrush, and she knows she can use it for good, but I guess she's not used to using it at all. So I told her a fun thing to do with airbrush is you put down a paper and you take a big piece of lace, put it over the top, and just airbrush over it randomly, and then change your color and airbrush over it, and move the lace and airbrush over it. And I thought that sounded like fun, so I did that. And we ended up with this. The first layer of lace, I put it down and I airbrushed blue and purple. And then I turned the lace about 90 degrees, and then I went over it with pink and green. And it is ridiculous and silly and didn't take much effort, but it's still, that's one of the fun things about airbrush, is that you can get quick results. And I could use this, it's not quite big enough for a background, but I can cut it apart and use it in other things. And yes, I did go over the whole thing with a pearl coat, because as shown with the dinosaurs, I like to do that. And then the doll things I have done and not photographed yet is one of the things that Flo sent was Little Mermaid. I don't know what the line was, very stylized head on the Winx body, and I think this is completely ridiculous and completely wonderful combination of ridiculousness. But I was always annoyed by the Winx arms. Articulation wasn't that great, so I was carving out around their elbows to give them a little more reach. I also carved out under the arms so they could come in closer to the body. And on this side I managed to actually break the hinge pin in her elbow, which I went back with the pin vise and I drilled a tiny little hole up into the hinge pin that was still in her arm, and a tiny little hole into that hinge pin, and I stuck in a sewing needle that I cut the top off of. And then I tried to cement the hinge pin together with acetone goop, because I was doing a lot of stuff with acetone goop getting her put together. I think she's in frame getting this doll I showed you last week, getting her put together. So I had some acetone goop still left, and I guess maybe either I didn't put enough on or this hinge pin is actually vinyl, hard vinyl, but I did not get it to adhere So right now it's just holding together with the friction fit. I might go back over it with super glue, but then that runs the risk of me just gluing it together. But, you know, the other option is a doll that I can't use because the arm's broken. I mean, I can keep a lookout for other Winx bodies in this skin tone also. So eventually I'll figure her out and I'll get some ridiculous clothes on her. I'm not sure. I might curl her hair and paint her eyes because, like I've said before, I'm not a super huge Disney fan, so this definitely is not the Little Mermaid in my hands. Another little ridiculous thing I did was the Barbie with the camera, Video Girl Barbie. I told you I'd get a new head for her, and I just random Kira head. And I also went through and painted some of the details on her shirt. Actually, it's a bodysuit. And of course, but I gave her some shorts and some shoes. So she's almost like a real doll now, except for this giant, as Elizabeth Platt said, body cam that she has. So that's that ridiculous thing. And then there's this ridiculous thing. I actually was planning to, this was a My Little Pony Equestria Girl doll, and I was going to make her into a Cyclops, and when I wiped her face paint off, I discovered that she actually had a little bit of sculpted eye well, and that would probably work for a Cyclops, but her ears were bothering me, and that, so I just took her head off, and I thought I had a Novi Star that would match this body color, skin color, but the Novi Star I had was green. Also, when I popped the head on, they both have ball joints in the neck, but when I popped the head on, it went way down on the neck and looked terrible. So I took that off and I sat around for a few minutes trying to think of what other head I could put on this body because I had it out and I wanted to use it. So obviously I eventually came up with this. This is a Halloween treat bucket that I've actually had for years because it seemed to be about doll size. I drilled a hole in the bottom, stuck the head through, and then blobbed hot glue in from the top. There's some posability to it. In retrospect, I realized what I should have done was put mineral oil or something on the neck knob and then blob the hot glue on it, because I think the hot glue would not have adhered to the neck knob, but it still would have conformed to it. But this works. I was trying to dress her, but the clothes that I had, well, these are the only shoes I had that even vaguely fit onto these feet. And the clothes that I had that were fitting this body were not really suiting shoes like this. So I need to make her something appropriate to her spirit and her shoes. And I'm considering putting like candy or something in the bucket. So that's a ridiculous thing that I did. And one of the doll heads that I believe Flo sent was Barbie's friend, the bride Tracy from the early 80s, and I had Tracy when I was a kid. So even though I'm not normally fond of brown hair, I decided to leave the brown hair on this doll. However, this head that Flo sent, I think it's Flo, had a big patch of missing hair plugs. So I actually went through and gave her some purple there. I was really lazy though. I didn't want to open my package of purple saran, so I used the already opened package of purple nylon. And I curled all of her hair really quick on straws, just like 3 straws rolled up to the base of her head. And of course the nylon holds the curl so much better than the saran. So she has little curls here and just kind of general waves over the rest. But I keep playing with these, hoping I can convince them to relax. So I guess I could pour water over them too, trying to get them to relax as much as the rest of the hair. I wasn't sure how she would look with just a little bit of color, fantasy color against the brown, but I know Lady Attizel has also gotten vintage doll heads that were missing hair plugs that she just put wild colors in, and it worked. So there she is. Now I haven't taken photos of her yet. And then the last thing doll-wise that I've done is I wanted to make a quick shirt for a doll. Sorry, there is still doll hair all over my desk. I want to make a quick shirt for a doll. It's a kind of shirt that I've made before. I take the button-up shirt pattern that I've shared, and I kind of flip it so the front is solid and the opening is in the back. But every time I do this, what I call it is I improvise around my patterns. I lay the pattern out and estimate where the center would be and estimate how much to add to the back. And it doesn't always work out the same, but it works out good enough. As I've said, the patterns I share are a lot more precise, refined, and thought out than the patterns I use just in general for my doll clothes. My patterns that I have tend to have bits that don't quite line up, and I just remember that and compensate for it when I sew it or cut it out. Or I have my basic pattern, and what I want to make is not that pattern, but it's close to it, so I'll just improvise, like cut out around it as I'm cutting it out without any real planning. But I decided, since my base shirt pattern is something I already had on my hard drive in an easily editable vector format, that I would go ahead and create a pattern from it. And I got one test pattern sewn, and that's this. So I'm going to eventually get this rigged up with proper markings and instructions and share it. Like I said, it's a variation on the pattern that I shared years ago, so you could sit down and figure it out, but I figure it'd be easier if I do the figuring for you. So hope to have that soon, but no guarantees, because it's obvious that my brain is going a million different places at once. And I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. Mainly the big thing was I wanted to get the dinosaurs mentioned and ask you to help me figure out how to get you the dinosaurs. And I have not forgotten that I said I would do a giveaway. She is still here. She's waiting for me to sew clothes for her, and that will happen. Eventually it will, just like all my promises of making videos of me sewing stuff. It will happen. I just can't guarantee when. So thanks for sticking around and having patience with me.